All right, we are going to get started with our Chapter 4, Day 5 notes, or our 4.5 notes. And now we're going to talk about graphing using slope-intercept form, which some of you have already shown in class. You do remember pieces of this, but we're just going to have a quick review again. A lot of the beginning of algebra is just reviewing concepts you've already done. So we're going to talk about slope-intercept form, which you should know already is y equals mx plus b. Now, where will you use this? This is an example of a word problem that we'll actually come back and solve once you guys do know what you're doing with this section. So we're going to go into this third slide that says slope-intercept form. So that is an equation is in slope-intercept form when it is in the form y equals mx plus b. It's important that you remember m is your slope, b is your y-intercept, or where that line is going to cross the y-axis. It must be y equals, and the term with the x must be after the equal sign. So here's where we really are going to be strict about getting that x term right after the equal sign and coming before that b. So it says write in slope-intercept form, then determine the slope and y-intercept. So in this one, you might look at it and think it's in slope-intercept form, but the thing that it doesn't have is that the term with the x must be first, right after the equal sign. So to change that, notice this is a minus 2x. So when I rewrite it, it has to stay a minus 2x. I can't just flip these two numbers. This is a positive 7, so I need to keep it a positive 7. Now I need to find my slope and y-intercept. Remember, my slope is m, my y-intercept is b. So if my formula is y equals mx plus b, negative 2 is my m, 7 is my b. So I'm just going to go ahead and rewrite that. M is negative 2. B is 7. All right, if we look at the next one, I need, again, just to have my x term to come first. It's in y equals, so that's the only thing I need to change. So I'm going to make it y equals 2x, because that's a positive 2x, minus 8. If I'm looking for my m and my b, my m is always with the x, and my b is the number that's by itself. Notice that when I write the slope, I don't write 2x, I just write 2. You don't want the x to be there. And my b this time is actually a negative number. So even though the formula is plus b, your b value can be a negative number if it's minus 8 or minus another number. All right, our last one's going to take a little bit more work because we need to solve for y. So I need to get everything away from that 3y. So I'm going to subtract 2x. So 3y equals negative 2x plus 9. Notice I put that x term first. Then I need to divide by 3 and just simplify. Negative 2 over 3 doesn't give me any nice numbers. It won't divide evenly, so I'm going to keep that negative 2/3 x. 9 over 3 simplifies nicely to a plus 3. So that is now in slope-intercept form. Hopefully that process is easier for you now that we've done that a lot of times. Now I just need to find my slope and my y-intercept. So my slope, again, is that number with the x. My y-intercept is that number that's by itself, or my b. So in this case, my slope is negative 2/3. It can be negative, it can be a fraction. And my y-intercept is 3. If at any point I'm going too fast or you miss something, just feel free to pause the video and copy the notes or rewind if you need to do that. All right, now we're going to quickly review how to graph a line by the chart method. So the chart method, if you remember, is when we give you an x or 3 x values, you find the y values, and then it makes it really easy to go ahead and graph that line. So if I have negative 3x plus y equals 2, the one thing we talked about is it's a lot easier to do this when it's in y equals. So I'm going to go ahead and get this into slope-intercept form. If I add 3x to both sides, I can get it into slope-intercept form very easily. So it would be y equals 3x plus 2. Now when x is 0, I would take 3 times 0 plus 2, which would give me 0 plus 2, which is just 2. When I substitute in 1, 3 times 1 is 3, plus 2 is 5. When I substitute in 2, 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. If you don't like to do this in your head or in your calculator, you can put y equals into your calculator and then use the table, and that's a really easy thing to do. Now I'm going to graph these points. 0, 2, 1, 5, and 2, 8. And then I want to connect those points with a line and 2 arrows to continue that line. Now notice what happened. When we graph that line, it's y equals 3x plus 2. Knowing what we just reviewed in the last slide, 2 should be my y-intercept, which it is. I can see it crosses at the y-intercept value of 2. And I know 3 is my slope because I can go up 3 over 1, up 3 over 1. So you could save a lot of time by just looking at this and knowing your slope and y-intercept and not having to do this table method. So now moving forward, this should get a little bit faster. Now we're just going to go through some examples. So if you want to graph lines by slope-intercept method, it first needs to be in y equals mx plus b. Then you need to plot the y-intercept, which is b, so find that value. Like in our last one, it was 2. If we look at this example, it's y equals 2/3 x plus 4. So the y-intercept is 4, and they stuck a point right at 4, and that's where you start. You can think about b is the y-intercept. You can think b stands for beginning. You always begin with the b, or the y-intercept. Then you plot 2 more points with the slope, or rise over run. So if the slope is 2/3, that's telling me to go up 2 and over 3. So they went up 2 over 3, up 2 over 3, and then they just connected it with a line. So that's what we will do now. So if I look, it says match each equation with its graph. Let's go through and find the slope and the y-intercept for each one first. So if I look at A, my slope is always that number with the x, so it's negative 2/3. My y-intercept is that number at the end there. So I have negative 2/3 and 2. When I look at this one, I have negative 2/3 again, but my y-intercept is now negative 2. So that's going to cross the y-axis at negative 2. And when we look at this last one, this one has a slope of 2/3, positive 2/3, and a y-intercept of negative 2. And now we just need to match these graphs. Now let's look and see for this first one. Let's start with the y-intercept, a y-intercept of positive 2. I know it's not this one because that's a y-intercept of negative 2. This one is reasonable because that y-intercept is 2. And this one is not going to work because that has a y-intercept of negative 2. So I know that this one, A, has to match with graph E. If we look at this next one, this has a y-intercept of negative 2, and so does this one. So these make sense to be left for these two. Now we need to look at the slopes. One is a negative slope, one is a positive slope. So let's look and see which line is negative. Remember, a negative line or negative slope looks downhill. So D is going to match with B because a negative slope is going downhill. It's going down 2 over 3, down 2 over 3. So we know that D matches with choice B, which leaves us with F matching with choice C. This is a positive 2/3 slope, so up 2 over 3, and we know that works. All right, now let's go ahead and try some on our own. We're going to do the next 2 example slides, and then we are finished. So this first one, we need to pick out our slope and our y-intercept. Our slope, hopefully you can see, is 1 over 3. Our y-intercept is a positive 1. We always start with that y-intercept. So I'm going to find 1 on the y-axis and put a point there. That is a point on my line. And now I need to see what is my slope. A positive 1/3 slope is telling me to go up 1 and then right 3. So I'm going up 1 over 3, up 1 over 3, up 1 over 3, and there's my line. So much easier and so much faster than making a table every time. Let's look at the next one. My slope is 2. My y-intercept is negative 4. So if I start with my y-intercept, I need to find negative 4 on my y-axis, which is right here. And now these slopes can be a little bit tricky. If my slope is 2, you might be thinking, I don't have a rise over run, I just have one number. Write it over 1 if that helps you. Now it's a positive 2 over 1, so I'm going up 2, right 1. So up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1. We always say to put at least 3 points, but if you want to put more, you may do that. And that is it. All right, our last 2 examples. This one is y equals negative 2/3 x plus 4. My slope is negative 2/3. My y-intercept is positive 4. Again, I always start with that y-intercept. So I'm going to find positive 4 on my y-axis and look at my slope. Notice now I have a negative slope. You always want to attach that negative to your numerator because that's going to tell you to go down. You never want to go left when graphing, so we always assign the negative to the numerator. So if that's negative, we go down, and then that denominator is always positive, so it's always telling us to go to the right. So this is telling me to go down 2, right 3. So down 2 over 3, down 2 over 3, down 2 over 3. And there is my line. And our last one is very similar. I have a slope of negative 4/5, a y-intercept of positive 3. Again, I always start with that y-intercept. So I'm at positive 3. And then I count from that point. Again, I see I have a negative slope, so I attach that negative to my numerator because that's telling me to go down 4 and right 5. Going from my y-intercept, I'm going down 4, right 5. Down 4, right 5. Let's say I wanted to add one more point just to be sure. If I can't go down 4, right 5 anymore, I can work backwards. If I went down 4, right 5, I can go back 5, up 4, and get another point on that line. And that is it. So the keys are always start with your y-intercept, so always graph that point first, and then use your slope from that point to get the rest of the line. And from there, it's pretty simple. So what I would like you to do now is if you flip to your matching work or your attached worksheet, it says, whom should you see at the bank if you need to borrow money? So for each one of these, it says, use the slope and y-intercept to graph each equation below. The graph, if extended, will cross a letter. Print this letter in each box that contains the number of that exercise. So this can be a little confusing, so we'll do one together. If I look at number 1, my slope is 2/3. My y-intercept is positive 1. Again, I always start with my y-intercept. So I'm going to put a point at y equals 1 for my y-intercept. Then I use my slope. 2/3 is telling me to go up 2 over 3. Notice I can't go up 2 over 3 anymore over here, so I'm just going to go back 3, down 2, and be on that same line. Now when I extend this line, notice I go through O, that letter O right there. So it says it'll cross a letter, and you print that letter in the box that contains the number of the exercise. So for number 1, we went through letter O. So down at the bottom, where you see a number 1, you write the letter O. And that's what you will do for each one of these. Now, once you do that, the other worksheet looks like this. It says, according to some students, what is the true purpose of homework? So for this, it says, write each equation below in slope-intercept form. So the first thing you need to do is get it into y equals mx plus b, which takes some work. Then you need to find the slope and the y-intercept at the bottom of the page. So we can do one of these together as well. Now for this homework, you need to use another piece of paper because you do not have enough space on here. Okay, so let's say we look at O, this very first one. We have 2x plus 5y equals 10. So if I start with that one, I'm going to subtract 2x to get y by itself. So I get 5y equals negative 2x plus 10. I need to get y by itself because I'm getting into slope-intercept. So if I divide everything by 5, I get y equals negative 2/5 x plus 2. Okay, notice, barely enough work. Barely enough room for work. So use another piece of paper. If you come with your homework tomorrow and it's just all the letters filled in, no work, that's not going to count for credit. You need to show your work. And since you have 2 worksheets for homework, we're going to have this worth 6 points instead of 3. Now, if I look at this, my slope is -2/5. My y-intercept is +2. So my answer goes here. Now, for this homework, you do not need to do H or V. You just need to do O through F.